And that's what's left of my shirt after it caught on fire. All right there, 944 fans. It's a week later, and we're pushing through with this power steering, well, converting this car back to power steering, and wow, this was a lot more complicated than I thought it was going to be. Let's take a look. I was thinking that the toughest part was going to be where the end of the steering shaft there, which is kind of difficult to see with all the stuff in the way, connects to the steering column right down in there. And that was difficult to get off because the manual steering rack drive shaft was kind of tighter than it should be. So it required lots of whacking with a chisel, but it eventually came off. It took, an hour or so to get it off of there without damaging anything. The new shaft went on there pretty good, but there's an issue with the new shaft. If you can see right there, it is not flat where the pinch bolt goes. It's curved. So there's no flat surface for the heads of the nut or the bolt to sit on. So I just ground a flat spot on either side and did the same thing with the other end of it too. And it's on there. Surprisingly, the hardest part about this whole power steering thing is putting the original steering rack, power steering rack, back in this car. And that's because the oil pan is very close. And it's actually, even with the spacers in there. So I had to make these spacers to go under the engine mounting rods out of, a couple big washers stacked together, which are basically 110 thousandths thick. So it's basically like 220, 210 thousandths thick spacer on either side to just lift the engine up a little bit. And now that I have the weight off the jack, it still seems like it's in contact over here on the driver's side. And I had ground the heck out of this wider section. Let's see if we can get some more light on it there. This section here is wider than the rest of the tube. So this is what I made the engine mount spacers out of. These are 110 thousandths thick. Used two of them stacked together, and I used the grinder to cut a pie section out so that I could just slide them in between the mount and the bolt that mounts it to the cross member. Well, grinding it, my shirt caught on fire. So that's what's left of my flannel shirt. On the plus side of things, I did figure out how we can use the reservoir that goes with the 2013 Chevy Caprice V8, and that's by putting it here. This hose is a little long now. This is just all put together to mock it up for fitment. All we really have to do is cut this hose a little shorter to bring it further this way, then use these two bolt holes on the engine, those two bolt holes on the engine, to make a bracket to mount it. So I consider myself very fortunate that my local hardware store is kind of an old school local hardware store, And one of the things they do is they actually make hydraulic lines. So I took my Porsche power steering line that comes from the pump originally, and my Chevy Caprice power steering line that comes from the pump, and the guy that does the crimping looked at it for a while, and we went in the back, we made the cut, and came up with this, which is pretty neat. So that means I can stick this on there where it's supposed to go, then put this on there, and then screw them together. I'm thinking this will work. Okay, so that actually fits pretty well. We'll probably have to come up with some kind of a bracket to attach to here, or maybe here on the hose, because it's too floppy like that. You know, you're going to risk breaking something and catching your power steering line hanging down and ripped off, and the ensuing fire and all that fun stuff. And we've got our return line mocked up too, so let's go take a look at that. So this is pretty much what our reservoir is going to look like. Still have to make a bracket to hold it here, but yeah, the return line comes up. I just used the factory Porsche hard line and bent it to this shape. It's slightly smaller than it needs to be for this, so we're going to have to try to figure out how to get this size hose down this nipple a little further, but we'll get that figured out later. And this goes down to the top port on the rack, which is the return. And we'll probably take it off and paint it, since we munged up the coating that was on it. So, you may have noticed that this swap has kind of caused us to remove a bunch of things. I pulled the original, well, the non-original manual steering rack out without having to remove anything but the manual steering rack. But I quickly realized that to put the power rack in, the front sway bar was in the way, so that had to come out. And also the positive line from the battery to the alternator could no longer live up in here. And also this little space here is where we had our remote oil filter lines run. So yeah, we're gonna have to figure out where to relocate that to yet again, all to make our steering effort a little bit easier. Yay. Here's a close-up of our rack to oil pan clearance problem. As you can see, it's, this rib right here is actually just touching the rack right now, and I believe this over here, that seems to be clear. So right now, right here, we're just touching. One thing I noticed while it was under here, which might contribute to our engine being a little low, is that motor mount is not straight. Looks like there's a lot of stress on it, forcing the front of the motor down. So we'll have to take a look at that. Let's look at the other side just to be sure. And the one on the passenger side doesn't look great either. It looks like the polyurethane is separating from that part that's bolted to the this bar here, not bar, tube here. So that's probably not good. Maybe that's why our engine sits too low. I don't know. Find out. So yeah, on further reflection, it sure looks like that motor mount and whatever's going on with the passenger side motor mount is probably what's causing our motor to be down a little too far and come in contact with the rack. So more on that later.